It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Give me your seat, Sienna Vance snapped. You don't look like you belong at the head of this table anyway. Camille stood without a word, her movements fluid and practiced. She stepped away from the velvet-backed chair at the center of the long mahogany table, allowing her sister to slide into the spot directly beneath the crystal chandelier. The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting was designed specifically to make diamonds sparkle and skin look like airbrushed silk. It was exactly where Sienna felt she belonged. "Much better," Marcus Thorne said, reaching over to squeeze Sienna's hand. His heavy gold watch clattered against the table, a loud, jarring sound in the refined atmosphere of the dining room. He didn't even glance at Camille as she took a seat at the very end of the table, relegated to the shadows where the waiters hovered. Arthur Vance cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. He looked at his younger daughter with a pride that never seemed to extend to his eldest. "1 million followers, Sienna. It's a remarkable achievement. The Vance name is becoming synonymous with modern influence." "It's more than just followers, Dad," Sienna said, tossing her perfectly curled hair over her shoulder. The scent of her perfume, a cloying, expensive rose, wafted down the table, thick enough to choke the flavor out of the appetizers. "It's about brand equity. Unlike some people, I don't just sit in a cubicle all day waiting for a paycheck that barely covers rent." She cast a pointed look at Camille's navy dress. It was tailored to perfection, the wool-silk blend draped elegantly over her frame, but it lacked the garish logos or shimmering sequins that Sienna equated with wealth. To Sienna, if a dress didn't scream its price tag, it was a bargain bin failure. "Now, Sienna, don't be cruel," Martha Vance said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked at Camille. "Your sister does what she can. Not everyone is born with your magnetic presence." Camille picked up her water glass, the silver pitcher having left a fine layer of cold condensation on the crystal. She felt the chill against her palm, using it to anchor herself. She had spent 3 years playing this role, the quiet, unremarkable sister who had allegedly failed to make anything of her life after college. They saw her as a strategic minimalist because they thought she was poor. They didn't realize she was a strategist because she was playing a much larger game. "I'm happy for your success," Camille said, her voice a calm, steady contrast to the high-pitched excitement at the other end of the table. "Are you?" Marcus smirked, leaning back as the waiter arrived with a bottle of champagne that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. "Because you've been awfully quiet. Maybe you're just wondering how you're going to pay for your Uber home while we're celebrating in the penthouse." The table erupted in light laughter. Arthur and Martha exchanged amused glances, while Sienna beamed, soaking in the validation like a plant in the sun. The waiter, a man who had worked at this establishment for 20 years and knew the true power players of the city, paused as he reached Camille. He started to pour the vintage champagne into her glass, his hand momentarily faltering as he caught her eye. Camille gave him a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. He straightened immediately, his posture shifting from professional service to something bordering on reverence. He knew exactly who had signed the deed to this building last month through a private equity shell company. "Actually," Sienna said, her eyes glinting with a sudden, sharp malice, "I think Camille should handle the bill tonight. Since she's so proud of me, it's only fair she contributes to the celebration. It might be a struggle for her, but it's time she learned what it feels like to support a winner." The silence that followed was heavy. Arthur frowned slightly, but he didn't intervene. Martha focused on her salad. They were letting it happen, the final, public humiliation of the daughter who didn't fit their brand. "Sienna, that's a bit much," Camille said, though she didn't sound upset. She sounded like someone observing a laboratory experiment. "Is it? Or are you just embarrassed that your credit card will bounce in front of Marcus?" Sienna pushed the leather-bound check folder, which had just been placed on the table, toward the far end. "Go on, show us how much you care." Camille looked at the folder. The total, including the rare vintage Sienna had ordered just to flaunt it, was staggering. She reached into her simple, unbranded leather clutch and pulled out a matte black card. It had no raised numbers, no bank logo, only a small, stylized lion embossed in the corner. She placed it in the folder and handed it back to the waiter. "Thank you, Robert," she said softly. The waiter bowed low, not the quick nod he had given Arthur, but a deep, respectful inclination of his head. "Of course, Miss Vance, it is always a privilege." Sienna scoffed, missing the waiter's tone entirely. "He's probably just being polite because he feels sorry for you. I hope you have enough in your savings to cover that, Camille. I'd hate for you to have to sell that boring car of yours." "Don't worry about my savings," Camille replied. She stood up, smoothing the front of her dress. The fabric felt like water against her skin, the kind of quality Sienna wouldn't recognize if it hit her in the face. "I've had enough of the celebration for one night. I have a meeting early tomorrow." "A meeting for what? Filing papers?" Marcus laughed, but Camille was already walking away. As she stepped out into the cool night air, her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from Darren Miller. "The acquisition of the Vance Group's primary creditor is complete. You now hold the personal notes for your father's estate and Sienna's lifestyle line. Just say the word." Camille watched as her driver pulled the sleek, understated sedan to the curb. She looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant where her family was still laughing at her expense, unaware that the floor beneath them had just turned to glass. "Not yet, Darren," she whispered to the empty air, her eyes cold and bright. "I want them to feel like they're winning right up until the moment I take the roof off the house." She got into the car, the door closing with a heavy, expensive thud that silenced the city. The countdown had begun. 2 weeks until the Vance family gala. 2 weeks until the bill truly came due. The next morning, the breakfast room at the Vance estate felt like a stage set for a play Camille Vance no longer wished to act in. The air was thick with the scent of overpriced Kona coffee and the cloying, saccharine notes of Sienna's signature perfume. Camille sat at the far end of the mahogany table, her tailored navy dress a sharp contrast to the chaotic explosion of designer shopping bags surrounding her sister. Sienna Vance didn't look up from her phone. Her manicured nails, painted a jarring neon pink, tapped incessantly against the glass screen. "Camille, I need you to run down to the boutique and pick up the alterations for my gala gown," she said, her voice dripping with the casual entitlement of a queen addressing a footman. "And use your personal card for the courier fee. My business account is temporarily restricted, some glitch with the creditors." Across the table, Arthur Vance lowered his newspaper, his expression one of weary disappointment as he looked at Camille. He didn't ask how she was or mention the cold dismissal from the night before. "Do as your sister asks, Camille. It's the least you can do, considering you're still living under this roof without contributing a dime to the family legacy." The irony was a physical weight in the room. Camille felt the cool, smooth surface of her phone in her pocket, the screen still glowing with the message she had received from Darren Miller. She wasn't just living under the roof. She was currently the one holding the mortgage. "I have a meeting this morning, Sienna," Camille said, her voice a calm, level stream of water against a forest fire. "I can't play your errand girl today." A sharp, mocking laugh cut through the room as Marcus Thorne stepped through the French doors, his silk robe billowing. He leaned over Sienna, kissing her cheek before sliding a condescending look toward Camille. "A meeting? What, is the local library having a bake sale? Or did you finally find a job that pays more than minimum wage?" Sienna giggled, leaning into Marcus. "Don't be mean, babe. Camille is very sensitive about her career in real estate research. It must be so hard, looking at houses you'll never be able to afford." Camille watched them, her eyes tracing the line of Marcus's expensive watch, a watch she knew was 3 months behind on its insurance payments. She felt no anger, only a chilling sense of clarity. Every insult they hurled was another brick in the wall she was building around their future. "I think you'll find the market is shifting faster than you realize, Marcus," Camille replied. She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't look at the breakfast spread or the family that had traded her worth for social standing years ago. As she walked toward the foyer, her phone vibrated. It was an automated alert from the Vance Group's internal server, an access point she had quietly maintained for 3 years. The glitch Sienna had mentioned wasn't a glitch. It was the first tremor of a landslide. Darren had successfully triggered a margin call on the family's primary investment account. She stepped into the hallway, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. In the kitchen, she heard the muffled sound of Arthur's voice rising in frustration as he took a phone call, his tone shifting from authoritative to panicked within seconds. Camille stepped out onto the porch, where the morning sun hit the hood of her understated sedan. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number that wasn't in her contacts. "Miller," the voice answered on the first ring. "The interest rates on the lifestyle line notes," Camille said, her gaze fixed on the sprawling, manicured lawn that Arthur thought he still owned. "Double them. Sienna's influencer brand just defaulted on its quarterly manufacturing payment. I want the trademark for Sienna V moved into my holding company by noon." "Consider it done," Darren replied, a hint of professional admiration in his tone. "They're already scrambling. Arthur is calling the bank every 5 minutes. He has no idea the bank is us." "Let him scramble," she said, watching as Martha Vance hurried past the window inside, her face pale as she clutched a stack of overdue notices. "I want them to feel the floor shaking. I want them to wonder why the lights are flickering before I finally turn them off." She hung up and climbed into her car. As she pulled out of the driveway, she caught a glimpse of Marcus Thorne in the rearview mirror, standing on the balcony and waving a hand dismissively at her retreating vehicle. He thought he was watching a loser drive away. He didn't realize he was watching the ghost in his machine finally take control of the controls. 2 weeks until the gala. 2 weeks until the Vance family realized that the daughter they had cast into the shadows was the one who owned the sun. Camille turned onto the main road, the city skyline gleaming in the distance, a playground she had already bought and paid for. The bill was coming, and she was the only one who knew exactly how much it was going to cost them. 2 days later, the morning fog clung to the glass towers of the financial district like a shroud. Camille Vance sat in the back of a black sedan, her fingers tracing the edge of a heavy, cream-colored envelope. Inside was the final piece of a puzzle she had been assembling for 5 grueling years. The car pulled up to a discreet side entrance of the Miller and Associates building, where the air smelled of rain-slicked asphalt and the expensive, ozone-heavy scent of filtered ventilation. She stepped out, her movements fluid and deliberate. Her navy wool coat was tailored to a razor's edge, devoid of any visible logos, yet the way the fabric draped spoke of a price tag that would make her sister's entire influencer wardrobe look like fast fashion. She didn't head for the main elevators. Instead, she used a private keycard to access the executive suite on the 42nd floor. Darren Miller was waiting for her in a room that felt more like a vault than an office. The walls were lined with sound-dampening velvet, and the only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of a secure server in the corner. He stood as she entered, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. "It's done," Darren said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew she wasn't there for small talk. He slid a blue leather folder across the mahogany desk. "The debt acquisition went through at 4 this morning. You now hold the primary lien on every major asset associated with the Vance family trust. The house, the cars, the secondary properties in Aspen, they all belong to your holding company." She opened the folder. The paper felt thick and slightly rough under her thumb, the ink of the signatures still carrying a faint, chemical tang. She looked at the signature on the default notice, Arthur Vance. Her father's handwriting was shaky, a stark contrast to the bold, arrogant loops he used when he thought he was untouchable. "He has no idea," she asked, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the quiet room. "He thinks he's dealing with a faceless conglomerate out of Singapore," Darren replied, a small, grim smile touching his lips. "He's so desperate to cover the losses from that failed hotel venture that he didn't even read the fine print. He just saw the liquidity and signed." The sharp chirp of her phone cut through the silence. She glanced at the screen. Sienna Vance was calling. Camille signaled Darren to stay quiet and answered, putting it on speaker. "Camille, where the hell are you?" Sienna's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with a frantic, entitled energy. In the background, Camille could hear the muffled chatter of a high-end boutique and the distinct clink of hangers on a metal rack. "I'm at Bergdorf's and my secondary card just got declined. It's embarrassing. I have Marcus and his friends here, and the sales girl is looking at me like I'm a shoplifter." Camille leaned back in her chair, watching the fog swirl outside the window. "I'm a bit busy, Sienna. Have you tried calling Dad?" "Dad's not picking up, and Mom is at her spa retreat," Sienna snapped. Camille could practically see her sister's face turning a blotchy, indignant red. "Just transfer $10,000 to my account. I'll pay you back when my sponsorship check clears next month. Or don't pay me back, honestly. You owe me for having to deal with your depressing energy at dinner the other night. Marcus said you looked like a librarian on a budget." The arrogance was a physical weight, a suffocating layer of vanity that Sienna wore like armor. Camille didn't flinch. She simply looked at the blue folder in front of her. "I can't do that, Sienna. The accounts are complicated right now." "Complicated? You're so pathetic," Sienna hissed. "This is why you'll always be the family shadow. You can't even handle a simple wire transfer. Fine, I'll just have Marcus put it on his card, but you're going to hear about this from Dad. You're lucky we even let you live in the guest wing." The line went dead. Camille set the phone down on the mahogany surface. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization of how far the fall was going to be. "She's going to be the first one to scream," Darren noted, crossing his arms. "Let her scream," she said. "The louder she is, the more people will see when the floor disappears." She stood up, gathered the folder, and headed toward the door. She had one more stop to make before the day ended. She needed to see the look on her father's face, not to reveal the truth yet, but to savor the irony of his continued condescension. An hour later, she was walking through the grand foyer of the Vance Manor. The scent of lilies and floor wax was overwhelming, a carefully curated atmosphere of permanent wealth. Arthur Vance was in his study, the door ajar. He was pouring a glass of scotch, his back to her. "Camille," he said without turning, his voice dripping with a weary sort of disdain. "I heard about the incident with your sister's card. Your mother and I are disappointed. You know how important her public image is for the family brand. If you can't be helpful, the least you can do is not be a hindrance." He finally turned, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his silk robe probably costing more than a year of tuition for a normal student. He looked at her as if she were a stain on the Persian rug. "I'll take it under advisement," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She walked toward his desk, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She placed a small, innocuous-looking envelope on the blotter. "I found these in the mail. They looked important." Arthur glanced at the envelope, which contained a formal notice of change in management for the family's primary holding firm. He didn't even open it. He just pushed it aside with a flick of his finger. "I pay people to handle the mail, Camille. Go find something useful to do. The gala is in 12 days, and I expect you to stay out of the way. We're announcing a major new partnership, and I don't want your aesthetic ruining the photos." She nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible curve to her lips. 12 days. I'll make sure I'm exactly where I need to be." As she walked out of the study, she passed Martha Vance, who was directing a florist on where to place a massive arrangement of white roses. Her mother didn't even look up, her entire world narrowed down to the symmetry of a petal. She stepped out onto the front portico, the cold air hitting her face like a slap. She pulled her coat tighter and looked back at the house. The stone pillars, the leaded glass windows, the sprawling lawn. It was a beautiful, hollow shell. She reached into her pocket and felt the cold, hard weight of her car keys. 12 days. The countdown wasn't just in her head anymore. It was written in legal ink and filed in the city archives. She climbed into her car and started the engine, the low growl of the motor a promise of the storm to come. As she drove down the long, winding driveway, she glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. The seconds were ticking away, and for the first time in her life, she was the one who owned the time. The day before the Vance anniversary gala, the air in the grand ballroom of the Willow Creek Club felt thick with the scent of over 1,000 imported lilies. Camille Vance stood near the edge of the stage, her presence as understated as the tailored navy silk of her suit. She watched the catering staff scurry across the polished mahogany floors, their movements frantic under the oppressive weight of the upcoming deadline. To anyone watching, she was merely a silent observer, a ghost in the machinery of her family's grandest social triumph. The heavy double doors swung open with a theatrical bang, announcing the arrival of the storm. Sienna Vance marched into the room, her designer heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement against the wood. Marcus Thorne trailed behind her, draped in a coat that cost more than a mid-sized sedan and wearing an expression of bored superiority. "The lighting is all wrong," Sienna snapped, not even glancing at the staff as she waved a manicured hand toward the ceiling. "It's too yellow. I look jaundiced in the test photos. Marcus, tell them it's unacceptable." Marcus smirked, leaning against a gilded pillar. "You heard the lady. Fix it or we'll find a decorator who can." Sienna finally noticed her sister standing in the shadows. A sneer curled her lip when she didn't bother to hide. "Oh, look, the charity case is inspecting the drapes." "Why are you even here, Camille? The help already has their instructions, and I'm sure there's a basement office somewhere that needs filing." Camille didn't flinch. She felt the cool weight of her phone in her pocket, a device currently holding the digital signatures that had finalized the club's mortgage acquisition an hour ago. She met her sister's gaze with a level of calm that seemed to unnerve Marcus, who shifted his weight. "I'm just enjoying the view, Sienna," Camille said, her voice smooth and devoid of the expected hurt. "You should really take a moment to look around. These things have a way of changing overnight." Sienna let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "The only thing changing is the balance of my followers after tomorrow night. This gala is going to cement the Vance name as the undisputed royalty of this city. Not that you'd understand. You've always been content with the crumbs." "Actually," Camille replied, stepping closer until the scent of her sister's cloying, expensive perfume filled the space between them, "I'd be careful with that tone. Arrogance is a heavy debt to carry when the bill finally comes due. You might want to double-check the guest list and the fine print on the venue lease. Sometimes, the person you think is holding the door is actually the one who owns the building." The room went momentarily still. Marcus frowned, his eyes darting between the two sisters. He noticed the way Camille's posture didn't yield an inch, a stark contrast to the way she used to shrink into the background. For a fleeting second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, a realization that the power dynamic in the room had subtly, inexplicably shifted. The moment was shattered by the arrival of Arthur Vance. He strode toward them, his face flushed with the stress of the event. He didn't look at Camille. His eyes were fixed entirely on his favored daughter. "Sienna, darling, the florist is asking about the centerpieces for the head table," Arthur said, his voice brimming with an unearned pride. He finally spared a dismissive glance toward his eldest daughter. "Camille, stop bothering your sister with your nonsense. If you aren't going to be useful, at least stay out of the way. This event is too important for your usual gloom." "Of course, father," Camille said softly. She saw the way Arthur adjusted his gold cufflinks, a gesture of a man who believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that the very ground he stood on was no longer his. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from Darren Miller appeared on the screen. "The lion is in the cage. The public records update at noon tomorrow. Sleep well, partner." Camille looked up at the glittering chandeliers, the light reflecting in her eyes like a cold, distant fire. She saw Martha Vance entering the room from the far side, gesturing to a group of socialites, her laughter ringing out like breaking glass. The entire family was gathered in their temple of vanity, completely unaware that the foundations had already been removed. "Enjoy the evening," Camille said to the room at large, though no one was listening anymore. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps silent on the mahogany. She had one more meeting with Darren to finalize the security detail for tomorrow's interruption. As she pushed through the heavy doors, she glanced at the digital clock above the foyer. 24 hours. The countdown was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. Tomorrow, at the height of their celebration, the Vances would discover exactly what happened when the person they ignored finally decided to speak. Camille stepped out into the night air, the cold wind a welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the ballroom. The stage was set, the witnesses were invited, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just watching the play, she was the one who had written the ending. The morning of the spring brunch arrived with a deceptive stillness that masked the impending storm. By 10 o'clock, the Vance estate had been transformed into a curated stage of floral excess and performative wealth. Camille stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the white-clothed tables scattered across the lawn like chess pieces. The scent of over-fertilized gardenias drifted up on the humid breeze, a cloying sweetness that felt as artificial as the smiles she knew would soon fill the space. She smoothed the front of her navy sheath dress. It was a custom piece, tailored to the millimeter, devoid of any visible branding or logos. To the untrained eye, it was merely a simple blue dress. To those who understood the language of the elite, the weight of the silk and the precision of the hand-stitched seams spoke of a price tag that could cover a year's rent in the city. She tucked a small, cold USB drive into the hidden velvet lining of her clutch, the weight of it a grounding presence against her hip. "Camille, are you coming down, or do you plan on lurking up here all day?" Martha Vance stood in the doorway, her neck draped in a heavy collar of emeralds that looked far too weighty for a garden party. She adjusted a stray hair with a manicured hand, her eyes scanning her daughter with a familiar mix of pity and disapproval. "I'm coming, Mother," she replied, her voice level. "Try to look a bit more vibrant," she sighed, turning to lead the way down the grand staircase. "Arthur has several important investors coming today. It wouldn't do for the eldest daughter to look like she's attending a funeral." As they reached the terrace, the rhythmic clink of silver against fine bone china grew louder. The string quartet in the corner was playing a sanitized, upbeat version of a classical piece, providing a soundtrack for the arrival of the guests. Arthur Vance was already at the center of the lawn holding court with a group of men in pastel polo shirts and linen suits. He looked energized, his chest puffed out with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his greatest gamble was about to pay off. "There she is," a shrill voice called out, cutting through the polite murmur of the crowd. Sienna Vance glided toward them, her floral print designer dress fluttering in the wind. The dress was a riot of loud colors and oversized logos, a walking advertisement for a brand that prioritized visibility over elegance. Behind her, Marcus Thorne trailed like a well-dressed shadow, his hand resting possessively on her waist. "Camille, darling," Sienna said, not even bothering to look her sister in the eye as she checked her reflection in the screen of her gold-plated phone. "I see you went with the minimalist look again. It's a bold choice for a brunch this expensive. Most people like to look like they actually have money when they come to these things." "I find that the loudest people usually have the least to say," Camille replied, offering a thin, polite smile. Marcus chuckled, a dry, condescending sound. "Always the philosopher. Maybe if you spent less time on books and more time on your portfolio, you wouldn't have to dress like a librarian at your own family's celebration." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. "Don't worry, though. Once Arthur closes the deal tomorrow, maybe he'll give you a little allowance so you can finally buy something with a label." Camille felt the familiar heat of a rage spike, but she didn't let it reach her face. She simply watched him, noting the way his expensive watch, a gift from Sienna, paid for with Camille's redirected dividends, caught the sunlight. She reached into her clutch, her fingers brushing the smooth metal of the USB drive. Wait for it, she told herself. Just a few more hours. The brunch proceeded with the agonizing slow motion of a high society ritual. Camille moved through the crowd like a ghost, observing the enablers and the sycophants who fed off her father's perceived success. She watched as Arthur bragged to a potential partner about the strategic acquisition of the downtown heritage site, oblivious to the fact that the actual deed was currently sitting in a digital vault he couldn't access. "I've spent years building this legacy," Arthur told the group, his voice booming with a false sense of authority. And tomorrow, the Vance name becomes the dominant force in this city's real estate. It's about vision. It's about knowing when to strike. Camille caught the eye of a server standing near the buffet, Darren Miller, dressed in the standard black-and-white uniform of the catering staff. It was a clever disguise. Nobody looked at the help, and it allowed him to move through the house and the grounds without suspicion. He gave her a microscopic nod, a signal that the final security protocols were in place. The trap wasn't just set, the door was already swinging shut. "Is that a wine stain on your sleeve?" Martha asked, appearing at Camille's side and gesturing toward a microscopic shadow on the navy silk. "Honestly, Camille, you can't even manage a brunch without some sort of disaster. Go inside and fix it. You're embarrassing us in front of the Millers." "Of course, Mother," she said, welcoming the excuse to step away from the stifling heat of the lawn. Inside the house, the air conditioning was a sharp, cold relief. She walked toward the study, her heels clicking softly on the polished mahogany floors. She didn't go to the bathroom to fix a non-existent stain. Instead, she entered the darkened room and sat at her father's heavy oak desk. She pulled out her phone and saw a message from Darren. "The filings are live. The board has been notified of the emergency session for tomorrow morning. They think it's Arthur calling it." By the time he realizes what's happening, the ownership transfer will be irrevocable. She took a deep breath, the scent of old leather and expensive cigars filling her lungs. This was the room where her father had signed away her inheritance. This was the room where he had laughed at her little business ideas while he bled her trust fund dry to fund Sienna's influencer lifestyle. She heard footsteps in the hall and quickly stood, stepping back into the shadows just as Sienna burst into the room, followed by Marcus. They didn't see her in the corner. "I'm telling you, Marcus," Sienna said, her voice dropping the sugary, sweet tone she used for her followers. "Once the deal is done, I want that penthouse in the North Tower. Dad promised it to me. I've already told my followers I'm moving in next month. If Camille thinks she's getting a cent of the commission, she's crazier than she looks." "Your sister is a non-entity, babe," Marcus replied, pulling her into a half-embrace. "She's just the help that doesn't get paid. Let her keep her little quiet luxury and her pride. We'll have the keys to the city." They shared a shallow, triumphant kiss before heading back out to the garden. Camille waited until the sound of their laughter faded before stepping out from behind the curtain. She felt a cold, sharp clarity. The rage had transformed into something far more useful, a surgical precision. She walked back out to the terrace just as Arthur was stepping up to the small podium set up near the fountain. He tapped a silver spoon against a crystal flute of vintage Krug, the sharp asterisk ping-ping-ping silencing the crowd. "Friends, family, and distinguished guests," Arthur began, his face flushed with champagne and ego. "I want to thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Saturday. But today isn't just about the spring. It's about a new beginning for the Vance family. Tomorrow morning, at the city's development board meeting, I will be making an announcement that will change the landscape of this town forever." He raised his glass, his eyes landing on Camille for a brief, dismissive second before moving back to his favored daughter. "To the future," Arthur shouted, "and to the legacy we've built together." "To the legacy," the crowd echoed, a sea of raised glasses and expensive smiles. Camille raised her own glass, though she didn't drink. She looked at the countdown clock on her phone. 18 hours. The Vances were celebrating a victory they had already lost, standing in a house they no longer owned, toasted by people who would be the first to turn their backs when the truth came out. As the applause died down, Camille felt a vibration in her clutch. She stepped away from the crowd and pulled out her phone. It was an automated alert from the city's land registry office. The preliminary title search had been flagged. The countdown wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a roar. Tomorrow, when Arthur stood up to claim his prize, he would find Camille waiting in the wings, ready to show the world exactly who held the keys to the kingdom. She turned her back on the celebration and walked toward the gate, her shadow long and sharp against the manicured grass. The brunch was over. The reckoning had begun. The ballroom of the Vance estate was a cavern of gilded excess, smelling of white lilies and the sharp, metallic tang of expensive champagne. The ceremony was minutes away, and the air hummed with the self-congratulatory energy of people who believed they had already won. Camille Vance stood near the arched windows, her tailored navy dress a stark, silent contrast to the sea of sequins and designer logos. She felt the heavy, embossed weight of the black leather folder in her hand, the anchor that would soon drag this entire house into the depths. Sienna Vance approached, her silk gown trailing behind her like a peacock's tail. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes raking over Camille with practiced disdain. "Still in that same boring dress, Camille. I suppose it's fitting for someone who's about to be officially cut out of the family trust. You look like the help." She laughed, a sharp, entitled sound that drew the attention of a nearby group of socialites. "Don't worry, once Dad signs the merger, I'll make sure you get a generous severance package. Maybe enough for a down payment on a studio apartment in the city." Camille didn't blink. She watched her sister's performative confidence, noting the way Sienna checked her reflection in the polished silver tray of a passing waiter. "You should focus on your own future, Sienna," she said, her voice a calm, low vibration. "It's shorter than you think." Sienna scoffed, turning her back to join Marcus Thorne. He was leaning against the mahogany bar, adjusting his gold watch with a smirk. "Is she still here?" Marcus asked, loud enough for Camille to hear. "I thought Arthur told her to stay in the kitchen until the guests left. Some people just don't know when they aren't wanted." The crowd began to migrate toward the center of the room where a small stage had been erected. Arthur Vance stepped up to the podium, looking every bit the patriarch in his custom-made tuxedo. Martha Vance stood just behind him, clutching her pearls and smiling with the brittle grace of a woman who valued status above her own blood. "Friends, colleagues," Arthur began, his voice booming through the silent room. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for Vance Global. With the signing of this merger, we secure our legacy for generations to come." He picked up a gold-plated fountain pen, hovering it over the documents laid out on the table. "And more importantly, we finalize the restructuring of our family holdings, ensuring that this empire remains in the hands of those who truly contribute to its success." "Stop." The word wasn't shouted, but it cut through the room like a blade. Camille walked toward the stage, the rhythmic asterisk-snick asterisk of her heels on the marble floor the only sound in the sudden vacuum of silence. Arthur's face underwent a violent, silent transformation. The triumphant flush of his cheeks curdled into a sickly, ash-gray pallor that seemed to sap the very life from his features. His right eyelid developed a frantic, rhythmic twitch, while his mouth hung open in a jagged O of disbelief. The sweat that broke out on his forehead wasn't the sheen of success, but the cold dew of a man watching his executioner. His hands, usually so steady when signing away lives, shook so violently that the gold fountain pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. "What is the meaning of this?" Martha gasped, her face pale as she stepped forward. Camille reached the stage and placed the leather folder directly over the merger documents. "You're signing the wrong papers, Arthur. You can't merge Vance Global with the Sterling Group because the Sterling Group doesn't exist. It's a shell company." A murmur rippled through the board members. Sienna's phone dropped from her hand, the screen cracking against the floor as her recording stopped. Marcus Thorne took a visible step back, his eyes darting toward the exit as he physically distanced himself from the man he had been sycophantically praising moments ago. "I am the majority shareholder of the holding firm that owns this estate and 40% of your company's debt," Camille said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. She looked her father in the eye, seeing the moment his soul finally collapsed. "You spent 40 years building a legacy on my mother's stolen inheritance. I spent 4 years taking it back. You aren't signing a merger. You're signing a surrender." Darren Miller stepped out from the wings, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. He handed a final document to Camille, his expression professional and cold. "You told me I didn't belong in this house," Camille said, turning to look at Sienna and Martha. "You were right. I don't belong in a house full of thieves. You have until midnight to pack your things. Security will escort you to the gate." She didn't stay to watch the fallout. She turned and walked toward the grand entrance, leaving the room in a state of shattered silence. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the heavy doors groaned shut behind her. Behind those doors, the shouting was just beginning, but for Camille, the silence was finally perfect. She reached the end of the driveway where a black sedan was waiting, but she stopped for a moment, looking back at the glowing windows. The keys were in her hand, but the house felt emptier than it ever had before. The reckoning had arrived, and it was colder than she had imagined. The engine of the black sedan hummed with a low, predatory vibration that Camille Vance felt in her very marrow. Beside her, Darren Miller tapped a rhythmic cadence on his tablet, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of shifting stock prices and frozen account notifications. They hadn't even reached the end of the long, winding driveway before the first explosion of sound erupted from the house behind them. Camille didn't turn around. She watched the rearview mirror as the front doors of the estate swung open again, spilling yellow light across the gravel. Sienna Vance stumbled onto the porch, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stone. She looked like a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage, her hands clutching her phone as if it were a life preserver. "Stop the car," Camille said softly. The driver complied, the vehicle coming to a smooth, silent halt just before the iron gates. She rolled down the window, letting the crisp night air fill the cabin. The scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, usually so peaceful, now felt like the backdrop to a crime scene. Sienna was screaming now, the sound carrying easily across the manicured lawn. "You can't do this! Camille, you pathetic little snake, come back here." Marcus Thorne appeared behind her, his face a mask of sweating agitation. He was checking his own phone, his thumbs swiping frantically. He reached out to touch her arm, perhaps to steady her or perhaps to comfort her, but she shoved him away with a snarl. The sycophant, realizing the golden goose had just been cooked, didn't try a second time. He stepped back, his eyes darting toward his leased SUV parked in the circle. The loyalty of a leech, Camille thought, only lasted as long as there was blood to drink. "Her primary credit card just bounced," Darren noted, his voice devoid of emotion. "The merchant at the boutique she visited this afternoon just processed the reversal for the 3 bags she bought. The bank has flagged her entire line of credit as high risk." Camille watched as Sienna finally reached the car, her chest heaving. She slammed her palms against the reinforced glass of the rear window. Her face was a grotesque, distorted version of the one she presented to her millions of followers. The influencer was gone, replaced by a woman realizing her entire reality was built on a foundation of stolen sand. Sienna's face didn't just pale, it seemed to physically deflate. The arrogant, high-arched brows she had used to look down on Camille for years collapsed into a trembling mess. Her skin, usually glowing with the finest serums Camille's money had secretly provided, turned a sickly, translucent gray. Her mouth hung open, a silent, jagged line of pure, unadulterated panic. Her eyes darted from Camille's calm expression to the security guards now standing at the edge of the porch, their presence a silent, immovable wall. The sheer, suffocating weight of her sudden irrelevance seemed to crush her shoulders, making her look small and utterly pathetic in her $1,000 silk dress. "Open the door," Sienna shrieked, her voice cracking. "Arthur is going to kill you for this. Do you have any idea what he'll do when he finds out you've tampered with the family holdings?" "I didn't tamper with them, Sienna," Camille replied, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the other woman's hysteria like a razor. "I reclaimed them, and you should check your messages. Our father is currently in a meeting with the federal auditors I sent to his office 2 hours ago." The color that had been clinging to Sienna's lips vanished. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. A moment later, the device chimed. Her eyes widened as she read the screen. Martha Vance appeared in the doorway then, clutching a pashmina around her shoulders as if she were suddenly freezing. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, watching her world dissolve. She looked at Camille, her expression pleading, the same look she used whenever she wanted Camille to keep the peace by accepting another insult. "Camille," Martha called out, her voice thin. "Think of the family. How can you be so cruel to your own blood?" "I'm not being cruel, Martha," she said, looking her mother in the eye for the first time in years without flinching. "I'm being precise. You chose status over your daughter, now you have neither." Marcus Thorne made his move then. Without a word to Sienna, he turned and began walking toward his car. He didn't look back. He didn't offer to help with the bags. He simply climbed in and started the engine, the headlights cutting through the dark as he prepared to flee the sinking ship. Sienna turned, watching him. "Marcus, where are you going? Help me." The SUV moved forward, forcing her to stumble back from the driveway. He didn't even tap the horn. He just drove, the red glow of his taillights disappearing into the night. Camille felt a strange, hollow satisfaction. It wasn't the fiery joy she had expected. It was colder, cleaner. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound folder. She handed it through the window to the lead security guard who had approached the car. "The eviction notices are in there," she told him. "Midnight is the deadline. If they aren't out, call the sheriff. I've already authorized the locks to be changed at 12:01. "Understood, Ms. Vance," the guard said, tipping his cap. Camille rolled the window up. The glass muffled Sienna's final, desperate scream of "You'll regret this," until it was nothing more than a faint, annoying buzz. "Where to now?" Darren asked, his thumb hovering over the next set of files. Camille leaned back into the leather seat, closing her eyes. The smell of the car, new, clean, and expensive, finally felt like it belonged to her. "To the hotel. I want to be awake when the morning news breaks about Arthur's accounting irregularities. I've waited 5 years for this sunrise. I don't want to miss a single second of it." As the sedan pulled through the gates and the iron bars hissed shut behind them, Camille didn't look back at the glowing windows of the mansion. She looked forward, into the dark, where the rest of her life was waiting to be built on her own terms. The reckoning had only just begun. 6 months had passed since the iron gates of the Vance estate hissed shut in Camille's rearview mirror. Now, Camille Vance sat in her new corner office on the 42nd floor of the Thorne Vance Plaza, though the thorn had been legally scrubbed from the building's facade weeks ago. The office was a study in strategic minimalism, floor-to-ceiling glass, brushed steel accents, and a single, low-profile desk made of reclaimed oak. The air here didn't smell of the heavy, suffocating lilies her mother favored. It smelled of white tea and the crisp, ozone scent of a high-altitude rainstorm rolling in over the city. She adjusted the cuff of her navy silk blouse, her movements precise and unhurried. The sleeping lion was no longer hiding, but she hadn't traded her quiet luxury for the loud, frantic energy of those she had displaced. She had learned that true power didn't need to scream to be heard. It lived in the silence of a signed contract and the steady beat of a clean conscience. A soft chime echoed through the room. Darren Miller stepped inside, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He didn't carry the frantic folders of a man trying to save a sinking ship. He carried a single tablet and a small, bitter espresso. He placed a physical tabloid on her desk, a relic of the world they had moved beyond. "Thought you might want to see the final chapter of the social season," Darren said, his voice laced with a dry, satisfied edge. Camille glanced down. The cover featured a grainy, long-lens shot of Sienna Vance. The former influencer wasn't at a gala or a yacht launch. She was standing in a gravel parking lot behind a mid-tier convention center, wearing a cheap, polyester promotional vest. She was handing out flyers for a discount auto show, her once-perfect hair frizzy under the humidity of a suburban afternoon. The caption read, "Fallen Idol, Sienna's new stage." The rage spike Camille expected didn't come. Instead, she felt a hollow sort of pity. Sienna had spent her life building a house of cards out of other people's money and digital validation. Without Camille's bank account to fund the performative luxury, the cards hadn't just fallen, they had disintegrated. Sienna had tried to call last week, a sobbing, incoherent voicemail blaming Camille for ruining her brand, but Camille had simply deleted it. The entitlement was a terminal disease, and Camille was no longer interested in being the cure. "And the patriarch?" Camille asked, her voice calm as ice. "Arthur Vance is officially settling into his new reality," Darren replied, tapping the tablet to show a legal update. "The accounting irregularities were too deep to bury. The board stripped his pension, and the federal investigators are looking into the offshore holdings Marcus Thorne tried to hide for him. Marcus, predictably, flipped on your father within 48 hours of the first subpoena." Camille leaned back, the leather of her chair creaking softly. She thought of Martha Vance, who had fled to a small rental in a town where no one knew her name, still sending letters to Camille that were essentially invoices for emotional damages. Martha couldn't understand a world where she wasn't the center of a social circle, and she certainly couldn't understand why her daughter wouldn't just fix this with a check. "It's over then," Camille said. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a heavy, embossed document. It was the final deed to the family mansion. She didn't intend to live there. She had already signed the papers to donate the land to a local conservancy. The house, with all its secrets and betrayals, would be leveled by the end of the month. "Wait for it," Darren whispered, pointing toward the window. Below, in the plaza, a crew was finishing the installation of a new fountain. It was simple, elegant, and bore no name. It was a gift to the city, funded by the anonymous majority shareholder of the firm. Camille watched the water begin to flow, a steady, cleansing rhythm that drowned out the ghost of her father's angry shouts and Sienna's mocking laughter. But justice, she realized, came with a tax. The cost of her silence for all those years hadn't just been her own happiness. It had been the total evaporation of the people she was supposed to call family. She was the victor, the owner of the skyline, and the wealthiest woman in the room, but the seat across from her was empty. She had traded a toxic tribe for a solitary throne. She felt the weight of the jade paperweight on her desk, a small, cold stone that felt like the only anchor in her new world. She had won everything she set out to reclaim, and in doing so, she had realized that the best revenge wasn't just taking back the money. It was becoming someone they no longer recognized. "What's next?" Darren asked, hovering his thumb over the next set of acquisition files. Camille looked out at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip behind the skyscrapers, painting the glass in shades of bruised purple and gold. She didn't look back at the tabloid or the ghost of the Vance name. She looked forward, into the quiet, expensive silence of a future she finally owned. "Next," Camille said, her voice steady and final, "we build something that actually lasts."
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.